For this lesson in art, we are going to be learning about Impressionism. We are going to become Impressionist artists. And to do this, we are going to learn about Impressionism, where it comes from, and we are going to look at some artists that helped contribute to the movement of Impressionism. I have my slides here on my iPad. They might be kind of hard to see, but they'll be attached. So, to start, we first have to understand what Impressionism is. So, Impressionism is often described with the phrase en plein air. This is just a fancy French word for outdoors. It kind of sounds like what it means, en plein air, and you can kind of tell that means outdoors. So all Impressionism art will take place outdoors, in sceneries. As long as it is outdoors, that's all that matters. So, Impressionism is exactly what it sounds like. It's an impression of what you see in front of you. And in case it's kind of hard to understand what that means, we are going to understand further what it means by looking at examples, and I'm going to describe it further. But at the end, there will be examples to help you understand what it means to have an impression of something and then put it on a portrait. And Impressionist art is created in a passing moment or a fleeting moment. So since Impressionist art is outdoors and you are taking the impression of what you see in front of you, the lighting is going to change in that passing moment. So you don't have all the time in the world to create this impression because the sun is moving, the clouds are moving, and say you're spending a lot of time on the grass. If you spend like 2 hours on the bottom part of your scenery, by the time you get to the top, the sun's going to be in a completely different place than when you started. So because of this, artists had to learn how to work faster than before. Next, Impressionism is an observation of light and color. So, like I said, the sun is moving, the clouds are moving, and the lighting affects how color looks to you. So, if the clouds are in front of the sun, the grass might appear darker because there is more shade. But if the clouds are not in the sun, then it might appear brighter. And same thing for like the grass that is farther away might be not as bright, then the grass that's closer to you might look brighter. So what's really important is to really look at how the sun and how the light in general is affecting the scenery in front of you. So instead of having really detailed like trees or grass or whatever you're capturing, I am looking for the color mostly. Like I want to see the outline of the objects for sure, but it doesn't have to be super detailed and look realistic. As long as the light, you're showing how you see the light, that's kind of what I'm looking for because that's a big part of Impressionism and what it is. So Impressionism also captures everyday subjects. So when you think of a scenery, a painting of a scenery, you might think of beautiful mountains or waterfall or the ocean, but Impressionism actually is just paintings of everyday scenes. So it could be your favorite park, or it could be your backyard. It doesn't have to be something really big and grand. And during this time period, that's kind of what the artists were changing. Because before it had been these beautiful sceneries, but they wanted to capture art of everyday life. So people walking to work or someone riding their bike in the park. Just everyday things that everybody can see. And then finally, Impressionism displays emotion. And you might be wondering, well, how can a painting display emotion? It's a painting. Well, depending on the subject, say you're painting your backyard and you have really good memories in your backyard of playing with your brothers and sisters or your parents or your cousins or whoever, then maybe it appears brighter and more beautiful to you. And you notice little things like flowers and the way the sun reflects, and it just looks really nice to you. But say someone is capturing their backyard and they don't have good memories there, they remember being lonely or sad all the time, then maybe these colors aren't as bright and they don't notice the flowers, and instead they kind of see it as a more gray, more dull scene in front of them. So that's how Impressionist art can display emotion, and we can kind of see the relationship that the artist has between themselves and the scenery that they are capturing. The next thing that we're going to focus on to understand what Impressionist art is where did it come from? So Impressionist art is very, very, very old, and it still is seen today, so it kind of shows how influential and important this art style was and is. So Impressionist art was first seen in the 19th century, and that kind of sounds like it would be the 1900s, but really it's the 1800s, so that might be even older than you expected. And the first time that historians and critics really saw Impressionist art was in Paris, France. So like where the Eiffel Tower is, there is a lot of art in France, especially during this time. The difference between Impressionism and other art styles was that it was challenging and it wasn't always accepted. Something important to think about when looking at Impressionist art is there was this war called the French Revolution, and a war in a country is obviously not a good thing. It doesn't make things happier or brighter for people, but instead it kind of brings them to reality. So as I mentioned before, Impressionist art is of everyday scenery. So it's not the most beautiful, romantic, perfect version of things. It's just what you see in front of you. And that was because the French Revolution kind of opened the eyes of people and had them see how real things were, and that capturing the most beautiful, perfect version of something wasn't always a great representation, especially of France during this time, who had just gone through a war. Of course it's not perfect, but instead these artists wanted to capture what was real. Impressionism also challenged other art styles, like realism. Realism focused on capturing exactly what something looked like, making it look as lifelike as possible, and maybe it wasn't things that were outside, so they didn't have to worry about the lighting changing or anything. Or maybe they just didn't care, or like they weren't focused on the light and color. They're more focused on making things look exactly how they're supposed to. So Impressionist art was different from realism in that way. And I said that Impressionism wasn't always accepted, and that is because it was seen as messy and incomplete. As I mentioned before, Impressionism can have visible brush strokes or unmixed colors. And when critics looked at this, they would be like, this doesn't look complete. This looks messy, like the artist isn't trying to capture what's in front of them. But really they were. They were focused on the light and the color. It's so important, the light and the color. I'm going to keep saying that because that is one of the most important things that I am looking for in this project. So there was this artist called Louis Leroy, and after he had viewed an Impressionist artist's art, he had said that it doesn't look like art, it looks like an impression, and it was meant to come off as an insult almost, or something negative that he saw, but instead, the Impressionist artists were like, oh, that's the perfect name for us. It is an impression of what we're seeing in front of us. It's not an exact representation, but it's what we're seeing and how we're feeling. So it's not the perfect, ideal version of something, but it's real. It's what you see. And that's the most important part. So, to understand Impressionism and where it came from, we're going to look at the artist by the name of Claude Monet. You might have heard of him, you might have not. Either one is fine. But he's seen as one of the people who really brought Impressionism to light. Obviously, he is not the sole creator, and there were many other people who practiced this, but today we're just going to focus on him because he is some of the most famous examples of Impressionism. But if we really like Impressionism and we want to revisit it as time goes on, then maybe we'll look at some other artists that also contributed to the growth of Impressionism. So, on the left here is a picture of Claude Monet. Obviously, he's an old man in this, but he was born in the 1840s in France. He was born to a businessman father. His father owned many grocery stores, and his dream for his son was to pass down the business to him. But Monet's mother was a different type of artist. She was a singer. So he kind of wanted to follow in his mother's footsteps in the sense that he wanted to become an artist. So he did not follow what his father wanted, but instead what his heart wanted, which was to create art. So his first art school experience started when he was 11 years old. He attended a secondary school for art, and his Impressionism didn't start here. Here he started with charcoal, which is a really dark kind of like, I guess you could see it as a crayon, but it's a different texture. So he started with charcoal, and as he got older, of course, he started discovering new means of creating art. He continued to go to art school until he was 16 years old, and that is when his mother passed away, and he went to live with his aunt instead. So this kind of paused his art school experience, but his art didn't stop here. When he was 20 years old, he started making a lot of artist friends, and the group that he stuck with is known as the group of Impressionists, one of the first groups. And like I said, he wasn't the only one to discover Impressionism, but instead it was this group. So here, this is kind of where Impressionism is seen as it being born in the 1800s in France by this group of people who started creating these impressions of what they see. Claude Monet dedicated his life to creating impressions. He traveled all around France, creating impressions of different everyday scenes that he saw, focusing on the light, and him and his Impressionist friends often painted the same portrait over and over and over to show how lighting can alter the way that a scenery looks. And this was really important and kind of showed how much they focused on light and color. But Monet continued to travel around France, and he dedicated his life to his art until he eventually settled with his wife, and he created art up until he died in 1926. So next, I want to introduce two examples of Monet's art. Obviously, there are so many examples, but I think these are two really good ones. And at this point, I would have papers to pass around so that the kids can kind of see closer up what the paintings look like, and we will have like a discussion. What do you notice? But the first one is called Impression Sunrise, and as you can see, what I kind of mean by an impression is it's not blurry, but it's kind of blurred together a little bit. It's not clearly laid out in front of you, like where the land and the distance is, and like even the boat, like you can see it's not like an exact detailed representation of what it is, but you can still tell what it is. And as you can see, like there's the sun, and you can see it reflecting on the water, and you can see how the sky looks when depending on how many clouds are in the sky, where the sun is at. And this is a really good example that I want to show you because it takes place outdoors, and it's hard because it's water, and water is constantly moving. So imagine how quickly he had to work to kind of show exactly what the water looked like and how the sun looked when it was beating down on the water, and this was done at sunrise, so you only have so much time before that sun has risen. So you gotta work kind of fast. The next one I want to show is Woman with a Parasol, and a parasol is just that little thing that she's holding. It kind of looks like an umbrella, but it wasn't really used for rain because it was smaller. Instead, it was used during women in this time to protect themselves from the sun. And this woman is actually his wife, which is really interesting to know, and that little boy is his son. So this is a good example. I wanted to kind of include a different example rather than just like outside. So this one incorporates a person. So as you can see, there's shadows, the clouds, and there isn't like super detailed of like their faces or anything, or the grass, but it's focusing on lighting and color. And these are two really good examples. And if you're interested and want to look at more examples, of course we can do that too. So now that we kind of understand what Impressionism is and we looked at an Impressionist artist, we're going to begin our project and become Impressionists ourselves. And our project is Watercolor Impressionism. So we're going to look at the directions first, and then we're going to look at the materials. So the first thing to do is you're going to find a spot outdoors. This could be your backyard, a park, the road, it could be anywhere you want. As long as it's outdoors, it's good with me. And you're going to take a picture. And once you have your picture selected, and you might need help with an adult or whatever, once you have your picture, then you're going to email this picture to me, or you can print it at home. If you have a printer and colored ink, then you are more than welcome to print it at home, but you can also send it to me and I can definitely get that printed for you. And this picture is due within 2 days. So ideally, I would introduce this project on the last day of our previous project, and like we have one more day to work on our previous project, and then the day after that we start this, so the kids kind of have time to go home and pick out their picture. Okay, anyways, so if you don't have the means to take a picture, that's completely okay. I'm going to be going around the school and be taking pictures of the outdoors, and I will print those out. Obviously it's going to be less personalized, and you'll have a range of options, but it won't be as big as if you're taking the photo yourself, but it'll still be our everyday life. Next, we're going to collect our materials, have them in front of us, work on our project, and then at the end of each day, we're going to put it on the drying rack because we're using watercolor and we don't want it to smudge or touch other people's or whatever. And then by the next day, they will be dry because it's just watercolor, and we will pick up where we left off. This project, we'll have 3 days to work on it. If we get to the end of the 3-day mark and most people are not done, then we can extend that, but I think 3 days is like the maximum. I think we'll definitely be able to do that. And then I'll ask any questions and answer any questions that there is. And now we're going to look at the materials. Obviously, all of this is going to be provided for you, but if you have any of these things at home and you want to bring them in yourself, that's completely okay with me. So obviously we need paper. We have special watercolor paper that works best with watercolor paint. We have our paintbrushes. There'll be different size paintbrushes, so you can do like little things and then big things. We'll have our reference photo that I printed for you or you have brought in. We'll obviously have the watercolor palette, and we'll have our wash bowl and paper towels. The amount of watercolor palettes, there might need to be like 1 for each 4 people or 1 for 2 people, depending on how many supplies. This all it changes, I feel like, depending on how many supplies that we have. Okay, and then the final thing we're going to look at, and ideally I'd have these printed out and pass them around. We're going to look at some student examples. These are really good examples. This one is a sunset, and this one's more of like a ideal, like beautiful scenery, but it does not have to be this. Like, this is just like a lighthouse and everything. But as you can see, I really liked how they focused on how the sunset looked in this moment. Obviously, because it changes, you only have so much time before the sun has set. And this is what it looked like in the moment, and you can see how it reflects on the water and how it affects like how like this land and the lighthouse in the distance looks like it looks all dark, but the sky is illuminated and the water is illuminated, and you can't really see the horizon line either. It's just implied, so like it's not like detailed like realism. The next one I wanted to show is this one, and this one's a little less obvious what it is, but I wanted to include this one because this is completely acceptable. I don't want you to think that your art has to be like this. It can be like this too. I really like this one because you can see that they really focused on the color. Like you can see that it's lighter blue here and it gets darker, and how like there's green here and there's green here, so maybe there's a bush here. I just really liked how they focused on the way that the light and color is. And they use the method of like blotting, and you can still tell what it is. You can tell it's outdoors. You can tell this is a tree, darker brown, it gets lighter brown, and then how the leaves are different colors. Everything is not just one color. They took their time to make the color lighter and darker. So I really like this one, and I think this is a great example of what yours could look like. I wanted to include these because it's good to see what other students have made, rather than just looking at Claude Monet, because obviously he was a professional and really good, and we all start somewhere. So I think these are really important to include.